Welcome to Career Practitioner Conversations. This podcast is presented by the National Career Development Association. Hello and welcome. I'm Melissa Venable, NCDA Director of Professional Development. This episode kicks off a series of conversations that originated at the DEI Symposium held at NCDA's recent conference in San Diego. I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Cheryl Love, who will lead this panel conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility, DEIBA. Dr. Love, thank you so much for bringing this series to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dr. Venable, for your help in putting together this symposium podcast series. And so this will be the kickoff presentation for the DEI podcast symposium series. And so I have an amazing group of folks on the panel with me today, and we're going to be discussing allyship, accomplice, and the mental and emotional costs associated. And so I am Dr. Cheryl Love. I am a career counselor, career specialist at the University of California, Riverside. And I also have the honor and privilege of being the co-chair of the training subcommittee for the Diversity Initiative and Cultural Inclusion Committee. We do amazing work. You're going to enjoy this conversation, I know, and the rest of the podcasts that are going to be part of the series. With me today, I'll have our first panelist introduce himself. Dr. Brown?
Yes, my name is Dr. Nathaniel Brown, and I serve as an assistant professor and clinical director for field experience placement at Johns Hopkins University. And I'm very excited to be here and participate in the conversation. Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Barnes-Gwynn.
Thank you, Dr. Love. Hello, I am Dr. Natasha Barnes-Gwynn. I am a clinical faculty member with Southern New Hampshire University, where I teach in the mental health program there. I also own a private practice where I am a career consultant and career counselor, Increasing Our Understanding Consultation, LLC. In addition to those things, I am one of the co-chairs for the Diversity Initiative and Cultural Inclusion Committee with NCDA. So thank you all for joining and thank you for having us.
Awesome. And next we have Inselman.
I'm so excited to be here. My name is Kyle Inselman. I use he, him pronouns. I serve as the Director of Alumni Career and Professional Development at the University of Denver in Denver, Colorado. And I also have a private career coaching practice on the side called Pride in Your Path, LLC.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. Dr. Monroe.
Hello, and I bring you greetings from Rowan University in Glassboro, New Jersey, where I am the Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Office of Career Advancement and also serve as adjunct faculty in two colleges, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, as well as the College of Education. And I am also proud to say that I am co-chair of the DICI Informed Practices Subcommittee for NCDA. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. It's a pleasure to have all of you on the panel for this very most important conversation, because there's been a lot of things happening in the DEIBA world. There's been a lot of attacks on this most important work. We'll start off by having you share your thoughts on this question. In your respective work settings, how have you witnessed the current political climate impact specific social identities, race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender identity, ability, status, spirituality in terms of mental health and career development?
I think it's very complex and very complicated based on institution type and size, at least where I'm at. And one of the reasons why I share that with you is because the leadership looks so different than perhaps the populations being served, meaning the students. And when the leadership looks that different than the populations being served, it's almost like people are trying to catch up with those populations in terms of their needs, in terms of how they may be perceived in those spaces, but also the standards and the reputation that goes with the history, herstory, and their story of the institution. So it's very complicated and complex because of those standards and the reputation. It was not required to be looked at, or it was not encouraged to be looked at, or it wasn't considered something that had to be looked at or addressed in that way. But now in 2024, as institutions like my institution continue to diversify, not only in the student population by becoming more internationally focused or globally focused, but now the leadership is having to start to change because perhaps the folks that have served in those positions for a longer period of time have different thoughts. Maybe it's a different generational thought. Maybe it's something they didn't have to consider in their training or in their educational pursuits. But I think it becomes very complicated and complex because people are coming from such different worlds in how they look at DEIBA. And so with that being said, I'll stop.
For sure. I think for many years, DEIBA were not a thought in a lot of the leaders who were not even having to think about these things. So good points for sure, Dr. Brown. Others?
We would be remiss in really not looking at the political climate in our country and the ripple effect into the institutions and on our campuses. So I appreciate the fact that Dr. Brown really started to unpack some of the social identities. I also want to talk about generational differences and the vision of our practice through the traditional versus the transformational lenses. Our students now are extremely diverse, covering many different intersections. And for us as professionals, we have to step up and really show up for our students to best meet their needs, not the way we want them to be, but as we co-create that space, the way they see themselves as. So it comes down to a lot of building self-efficacy and agency in our students so that they can really maintain through whatever ripple effect or ebb and flow that they're experiencing in society. So we would be remiss in not really looking at our political climate, the fact that we are approaching a very divided election season, and there is an impact on our campuses because we have different worldviews and philosophies that are not being seen and heard. So how do we make our students know that they matter? And I think that is really the thrust and impetus that needs to really be highlighted in the work that we do.
For sure. And I think that oftentimes we don't do a good job in acknowledging the political climate, acknowledging its impact on our students, and really making them know that they matter. And I think that's part of the reason why some of our students really struggle with mental health issues and concerns, because we are not doing the job that really needs to be done, and also respecting the intersectionality of our students, really key. Others that want to weigh in on this before we continue on in our conversation?
I'll jump in. Dr. Monroe mentioned our current political climate and how it affects the work that I've been doing. I work in middle school, high school settings, but I also work in a higher education setting. And just across the board, what I'm seeing is there's a blanket effort. There is an overarching effort there. But in that overarching effort, what I'm also seeing is cherry picking. I'm seeing that we're picking the things that we want to address. We're picking the identities that we want to uphold. We're picking the things that are of importance when in reality, all of the cultural backgrounds are important and should be given attention and should be given focus. So I'm seeing that there are some efforts, there are some, because it's so big now that you can't avoid it. You can't act like it's not there, and you can't say something, not say something about it. You have to speak on it. So I'm seeing the effort in, well, we know it's an issue, so let's say something. However, I'm also seeing that the something that we're saying may not always be addressing all of the issues across the board. Just an example of what I'm saying is, there's a big push for the pronouns right now. So there's a campaign for making sure that all of us are using our pronouns that we want people to use when they refer to us, so that students feel comfortable. However, when we talk about the mental health aspect of things, we just had something major happen with a Black woman getting killed by the police officer who had a mental health condition. And that was basically overshadowed. Like, never heard anything about it from any of the sectors that I work in. And so saying that to say we're just picking the issues that we want to address, and it's almost like we want to pick the things that are less controversial or that are going to give us more attention because we've addressed that. It'll give us more positive attention, I guess, to say. So that's basically what I've been seeing across my work experience.
I like that. So big now, you can't ignore it, but you're cherry picking. And so it's clear we still have work to be done, to do in this area for sure. Cal, you wanted to add to?
Yeah, because there are so many things happening in the political climate, it can make it hard to know where to start. And that feeling of overwhelm, I think, is showing up not only for ourselves and our colleagues, but also for our students and our clients. There's the direction of feeling so impacted, stressed, distressed by what is going on in the climate. And then there's also the direction of these specific impacts on individuals that drive into needing to make a career decision. So a lot of my work is with the LGBTQ plus community and with the trans community. And when we're seeing multiple states pass laws banning access to necessary medical care for these populations, or other legislation that is impacting, for example, closure of cultural centers and LGBTQ centers at some college campuses, this is leading a lot of people to say, I need to move. Maybe it's because of trying to find a better, more welcoming place, but sometimes it is the literal necessity of accessing medical care that is immediately become inaccessible in their location. And that can create an enormous amount of stress because it then turns into, well, if I'm going to move, I need to find a new job. I need to find a new place to live. I need to be able to pay these bills. I need to pay the moving costs. And so I think that there's just these compounding effects that then come into intersection with us in career development because of the immediate and sometimes dire needs that people have. There's almost this whiplash of laws being passed, then blocked, then rescinded, then passed again. And the uncertainty that can come with that and the material impacts on people's lives.
Well, thank you so much with that, Kel. There really are forces that are coming to bear, and I call it legislative oppression. And so we as career practitioners have, I think, a duty to help our clients, to help our students as they're dealing with these forces. So that leads me to the next question in our conversation today. Given history surrounding anti-Blackness, racial violence, and white supremacy, how can career practitioners address career development and the interconnection of mental health? Considering these forces, they seem to be ramping up, not going away, and these issues that were brought to the forefront in the early stages of the pandemic. And they're still with us present day and seem to be getting louder and louder and louder. What can we as career practitioners do? And some of you have already touched a little bit on this, but your thoughts, things that you can share with your fellow colleagues out there doing this most critical career development work.
I think one of the hardest challenges in looking at our work oftentimes is there are movements that are occurring throughout the country that are so divisive that people don't actually know who their allies are or who their comrades are. And part of that discernment for a lot of people is paying attention to not only what's advertised, but the consistency of what's spoken in the advertisement of what allyship and comradeship might look like. And what I mean by that is, if you're going back to Dr. Inselman talking about states that are engaging in banning practices legislatively, right, is being able to help people become more attuned to states that don't have that legislation and has not presented in their advertisement that they're moving in that direction. But one of the things that's even more important is looking at institutions' mission statements and visions around what it means to be a part of DEIBA, and also not being hesitant in engaging and broaching the topic, because a lot of people who are experiencing racial bias, gender identity bias, trans bias, all of those things, they don't know until and it's not easy to even ask, right? Because in many states now, you can't, because they've legislatively removed that opportunity in the classroom at the undergraduate, graduate level. And so the differences between public and private institutions, right? And also even within that, what is the institution type and size? And what has been the history of their story of allowing faculty members to engage in those kinds of conversations? Currently where I'm at, yes, there has been a message that's been sent out about what we will address and what we will look at based on people just want to get buzz on the internet. And so, yes, institutional leaders are saying, as an institution, we will address these issues based on our mission, based on our vision. And so I think as career counselors, we have to not only be aware, but we actually may have to do the legwork on behalf of our students, because they may be hesitant to ask those questions due to the power dynamic. There's a huge power dynamic in matriculating in institutions of higher learning. And if you ask a certain question, you automatically out your identities in asking those questions based on misperceived thoughts around who's sitting in front of you, right? And if those folks are in leadership positions, they can still remember and share that information. And if you don't know where they stand on the issue, there's still the power dynamic that can stop you in your matriculation. So I think we have to be not only aware, but we actually may even have to come up with lists like, these are states that you may not want to consider, right? That's a real thing. These are institutions you may not want to consider at this time because of legislatively enacted policies and procedures that has affected not only how students can matriculate and have discussions around DEIBA, but also what faculty members can do or not do in their programs.
For sure, helping students be aware power dynamics are a real thing. And it does impact on our students' health and well-being for sure. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Brown. Others? As it relates to what career practitioners can do in these difficult times.
So when I think about what career practitioners can do, what first comes to mind for me is just their own cultural competence. And the key components of that being their self-awareness. So being able to understand, where do you sit in all of this? What emotional and mental impacts is all of this having on you? And how can you make sure that you're taking care of yourself so that you can continue to do the good work? So that self-awareness is important. And also, are you playing a part in some of these things that are coming up that are major issues in our culture at this point? The next piece is gaining knowledge. If you don't know, you need to know, and it's not okay at this point to say, well, I just didn't know. A lot of times people hide behind the lack of knowledge, but it's too much information out there for people to lack knowledge now. So do your research. And then the next part of it is gain the skills. If you're going to function in the role of a career practitioner, then you need to make sure that you're equipped with the skill to handle these things, to handle these issues with clients or students as you're dealing with them, and to help them and empower them to be able to move forward and handle issues themselves. Because a lot of times their voices are louder than ours in certain situations. When it comes to students, sometimes they can make the difference. Their voices are heard because the money for the institution comes from them. So sometimes it's just empowering them to use those numbers and use their voices to speak out on the issues that are really causing a problem for them at an institutional level or beyond, because voting is a thing. So I see a lot of, universities and other entities, businesses, and communities that are pushing voting in the younger generation now because it's important and their voices do matter. So I think that cultural competence piece, and while doing all of this good work, taking care of yourself. Wellness is key. Making sure that there's a self-care piece and component as we're doing this good work is important for career practitioners as well.
For sure. I love the self-awareness, cultural competency, and having people reflect, are you playing a part in the oppression that students, especially students of color, face day in and day out? I think that's critical. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Diversity Initiative and the Cultural Inclusion Committee, we formed a task force. We are revising, have to do a shout out to the task force. We are revising the multicultural competencies that NCDA has. They haven't been revised for over 10 years, so it's about time. And our committee is taking that on and should be having something for the whole membership to look at and provide feedback on real soon. But really great points. Thank you. Cal, Dr. Monroe?
I can jump in there on that training piece and the cultural competency, something that can be done within a university career center or other career services organizations that have larger staff is to look at how can we do training together as a team. And so at the University of Denver, we've had a DEI strategic plan for our department for the past, I think it's been 4 years that we've been working on that. And one of those components was training. And so looking at, can we bring in someone from the other offices on campus to do a training for our staff and really dig into how do we address these issues that are coming up for students or the cultural competency to work better with these students as career practitioners. So really, it's not just a blanket 101 session. It's how do we really adapt this to our work? And so we brought in folks from like the Disability Resource Center. We brought in our staff from the Cultural Center, other partners on campus, as well as off-campus partners for some topics that we wanted some really specific career development related training on. But in addition to that, I also think it's important working directly with students to, for those of us who are not in counseling roles, to still make space for connecting with students where they're at or with clients where they're at and saying, hey, I know that there's been some really heavy things in the news lately. Like, how are you doing? Giving space to say it's okay if you take your job search a little slower because you're focusing on taking care of yourself while you're feeling grief or while you're feeling stress. I think also some of the, Dr. Monroe mentioned self-efficacy earlier, some of these pieces of efficacy resilience can also be connecting people to role models and to mentors, to examples of other people who have made it through, who have made it to where they're trying to get. So working especially with students who are at the very beginning of their career, if they don't see those role models, or some people say those possibility models of someone who is succeeding in their field, who has made it through the hardships and reached that career goal, it can be hard to keep going. And so I think that's a special area where career development folks can really shine, is helping with that networking, mentorship, role modeling type piece.
Love it. Love it. I love the fact that you guys in your area, your department, have committed to ongoing training. Because oftentimes people think in the area of DEIBA, hey, I did this work on check and then move on to other stuff. It is not something that you do a checklist for. It's an ongoing process and journey. Mentorship is key. It helps you to see the possibilities, just like you were mentioning, Cal. And I know, Dr. Monroe, you wanted to add to this part of the conversation. So, Dr. Monroe.
So the responses to the question have been so rich and robust. I just wanted to drill a little deeper, right? So it's for us as career practitioners to see ourselves as servant leaders, right? So who do we serve, right? Who's actually sitting in front of us, or who are we partnering with, right? And honoring them as humans, right? All the beauty and uniqueness that they are, right? Everything that we know that's in their visible backpack, and everything that's in their invisible backpack, right? So I want to go to a point that Dr. Barnes-Gwynn surfaced, right? And that is around emotional intelligence and really truly understanding oneself. As we come into contact with people who have different lived experiences and different worldviews, right? And really respecting that we are all different, but we can come together and partner in order to achieve a real desirable end. I think that is oftentimes missed, right? Because we're in traditional spaces where we're expecting all of those we serve will be able to fit into this pattern and this formula and be on their merry way in a certain amount of time. And that's not the case, right? So we're oftentimes found fitting a square peg in a round hole, and that just does not work. We must be able to differentiate the work that we do in order to meet the students and even our fellow colleagues where they are, to take them to the next level in whatever partnerships that we are fostering for the benefit of the greater good. So I know that sounds a little philosophical, but that's exactly where we are, right? If we don't see everyone as a human that is uniquely and wonderfully made and be able to partner with them, that means that maybe my thought is not their thought. Maybe my lived experience is not their lived experience. That's not right or wrong. It's just being beautifully unique so that we can really collaborate effectively to achieve the goals that we have come together to meet. So those are the pieces that I wanted to add, because everything was so rich, but I really want us to really focus on how do we serve and do we serve well?
For sure. I love it. Servant leaders. That's what all of us working in this area, career development, that's what we should be focused on. And that's definitely a call to action there. So I could talk with you all day. You know that. I love being in community with you, but we don't have all day. So as we get to the close, I wanted to ask this final question. What are some of the mental and emotional costs associated with being an ally and or accomplice in DEIBA work? And second part, how do you handle the cost in your own work?
I want to address that question, and I will, as briefly as I can, but I still want to add a little bit to what Dr. Monroe said around the human experience. And I think one of the things that comes to mind with career practitioners is how we move from formalized education and training around our differences to more informalized, to have those uncomfortable conversations. And what I mean by that is offering opportunities for immersion experiences that are within the country and also internationally. So I believe in study abroad. I do believe that is an opportunity to place people in different situations, but we can do that also domestically. We've seen programs like City Year, we've seen AmeriCorps, we've seen a lot of federal supported programs that place people in different environments to be a servant leader. And when you do that, it allows people to be challenged in their biases, their stereotypes and stigmatizations of other folks, while also offering to be supportive. And in that same lens, not just recognizing that they can just simply support someone, that's their only interaction. We don't want their only interaction to see someone that's in a minoritized place of life. We don't want them to view them as only being someone they can help. We want them to engage with them. The last thing I want to offer for consideration too, in terms of being an accomplice, is it's important for me to recognize that the emotional cost is based on what people see on the outside of what they don't recognize because they may have not had the engagement with someone like me. That's emotionally exhausting because on the one hand, I'm proud to be a Black man. I love being Black and I love being gay. However, other people, when they see me, don't know that about me because of their own fear. And it's exhausting to have to prove and show and demonstrate and go between different languages. And even with that, I'm still viewed as a Black man who's tall, who's big, and viewed as a threat, despite the education, despite being exposed, despite the international travel, despite the institution type and size. And so that is exhausting, is the constant proving every single day that I am not a threat, that I'm actually here to be supported.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. Yeah, it is exhausting having to navigate who we are, how we show up, and how people react to that. So I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability as you discuss that. Others, as we come to a close with our conversation today.
I briefly add, Dr. Love, that what we do is hard work. And because it's hard work, it can sometimes leave us with a heavy heart. And our heart and our mental is all connected. And so when we talk about the mental and emotional cost, I think sometimes this work can be heavy. It can be more than we feel like we can bear. And so during those times when the work gets heavy, when it's too much, I think a couple of things that I lean into is the support from others. We talk about being servant leaders and the people that we serve, but we also have to think about the people that we include in our circle in this work that we do. And we've got to make sure that we're creating a support system for ourselves that can uplift us when we're downtrodden and when this work has become a little bit too much. The other piece of it is find the fun in it. Advocacy is heavy. It's a lot of work, but it can be fun. When you see the change, when you see the things happening, and when you see growth, that's fun. That is exciting. And it's what continues you and fuels you to keep doing this work. So those would be the two things that I would say, just making sure that a support system is solid and finding the fun in advocacy.
And shout out to Dr. Barnes-Gwynn, who has been the co-chair of the Diversity Initiative and Cultural Inclusion Committee for going on, I think this is the third year. It is. You've been doing this for a while. Give you props. And that's a committee for NCDA that is doing the work. We are at the forefront of what makes NCDA a great organization. And it is a place that you can have fun as you're doing this heavy work. So kudos to you, Dr. Barnes-Gwynn. And then also got to give a shout out to my friend who's not on the conversation today, but is also the co-chair for that amazing committee, Ruben Brett. He's amazing. Love him. Ruben, when you watch this, gave you a shout out. You do great work. Dr. Barnes-Gwynn. Anyone else as we are entering our final minutes in this conversation for today?
So real quickly, I just want to reinforce that this work is not for the faint at heart. It's courageous work. It's brave work. And it's not in a rhetorical sense. It's really, you on the front line, you're doing this, you're facing barriers, you're pushing through, but you're not alone. So it always makes me feel good to know that I have fellow advocates, right? I have fellow warriors, right? I have fellow trailblazers that when I get tired, I feel very comfortable passing on the baton and saying, okay, I need to tap out. Can you please tap in? That's really a powerful movement because the energy never ends. It's just reframed and we keep on pushing and we push as a collective. Also, I wanted to say it's important that we celebrate the wins, right? That allows us to fill our wells again, whether it's the small win or the large win. I could really go on and on. I know we're coming to the end and I definitely want to hear Kyle's voice. So I just want everyone to stay encouraged. And if you're really in this work, doing this work for the purpose of this work, that you are not alone. And if you're feeling the pinch of allyship, then that means you're doing great work.
For sure. You're not alone in this journey, and it is courageous work. And so I'm glad that you're in this with me, Dr. Monroe. You're amazing. Love you. So I love you too, Cal. So I gotta give you a shout out. I had the chance to work with you over the years, co-chairing the DEI committee for NCDA. So just for you to know that. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, I gotta just say ditto to all of the above. Couldn't put it better. that lesson of learning to be able to pass the baton is one that I've learned very, very focused on that in the past couple of years, I'll say. And so being able to pass on the baton, whether that's, in a formal committee work sense, or whether that's even just being able to step back and say, let me uplift the other voices, the other activists in these communities that I've been a part of. And what that has allowed in my own life is being able to give the energy I have in other places where I can. If I'm not putting my, the heart work, as Dr. Barnes-Gwynn said, if I'm not putting all of that energy into one space that is more emotional for me, I can take those bits of energy and say, let me lend it to this community that I'm an ally to. One of the pieces that's so important with that is being able to be uncomfortable with not necessarily getting it right the first time. And being able to learn. You learn by doing, or at least I learned by doing. And that's something that in the past year I've really leaned into, was saying that if I see a community that's saying, please, we want more voices, we want more help on this, to be able to come in and say, okay, I know I'm not quite there yet with understanding everything, but let me do what I can. Let me raise the voices that I can. And that's how we build momentum. That's how we build numbers and really lean into the power of community. I've heard recently it only takes something like 3 or 5% of a population to make a huge difference, to overcome these oppressive forces through nonviolent means and through social change. And so just leaning into one person at a time, you build that movement and those numbers, and you see that positive change.
For sure. So thank you all so much for being in conversation with me and kicking off what is going to be an amazing podcast series for NCDA. Again, it will be the DEI Symposium podcast series, taking all the wonderful presentations that took place at the NCDA Global Conference in San Diego and creating podcasts from them, because amazing topics were discussed, and we wanted to be able to share it with the NCDA community at large. And so I hope when you listen to this, you will feel the joy that these amazing people who I love, Dr. Brown, I'm so glad I've gotten the chance to get to connect and know you a little bit. Looking forward to more chances to do just that. And then the rest of the QPAL, Dr. Natasha Barnes-Gwynn and Dr. Monroe, love you. Nothing you can do about it. Looking forward to continuing to get into good trouble with you and do this work. Hard as it may be, it's important, it's necessary, and I'm glad that you guys are part of the crew. And thanks again, Dr. Venable, for your work in helping to put together this amazing podcast series. Thank you. And don't forget, there's 8 others to listen to after this one. So I hope you listen to all of them. You will be blessed.